I want to introduce you to Barbara Cannon. She is a functional behavioral analyst. Sorry. And I'm going to read a little bit about her so we can understand a little bit of her paradigm of thought and where she's going with her presentation on functional behavioral analysis. As Senior Director of Consultation Services for Melmark New England, Barbara works with a team of Board Certified Behavior Analysts to provide a variety of consultation services across the state of Massachusetts. She holds a doctorate from a combined school and counseling psychology program at Northeastern University, where she also received a master's of education. She is a Board Certified Behavior Analyst who began her career in residential services for individuals with autism spectrum disorders, and has been providing services to these individuals and their families for over 30 years. As a teacher, program director, and consultant, much of her experience has been in developing and overseeing quality education programs for individuals with autism in the home and in school settings. Dr. Cannon's work has also included therapeutic support services in public and private school settings. She has presented at local, regional, and national conferences and has co-authored both peer-reviewed journal articles and book chapters. And without further ado, I'd like to welcome a fellow New Englander to the stage.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Basically, that means I've been around for quite a while. And I'm so happy to be here. And thank you very much for inviting me. And I sat through some wonderful presentations earlier that I learned a lot. And despite having presented in many places, I still get nervous about it. So bear with me in all of this. And these lights are really amazing up here. So yes, I did start many, many years ago and actually have vivid memories of a little 7 or 8-year-old boy with Angelman's. And I could remember his infectious smile and how much fun he was, but I also do vividly remember when he was not very happy and presented some challenges. So I'm thinking, I wish I knew then what I know now. There's a song like that too, isn't there? So my career went primarily along the route of autism spectrum disorders, and in the past 30 years, I've seen only a few with Angelman's syndrome, so I'm really excited to hear your stories tonight and learn more about this diagnostic category. But what I'm going to be speaking about today really goes across, as you could tell from some of my background. I've worked in a number of places with young children to adults, and my core is in applied behavior analysis. I'm old enough, sadly, to remember when it was called behavior mod, and most of us shudder sometimes when we hear that because it has come quite a ways and is actually the science of behavior. And we use mostly evidence-based research. We look at behavior in terms of a scientific methodology. How do we define, measure? How do we intervene? How do we make decisions on how our interventions worked or didn't work? So from that, the field has evolved quite a bit. And today I'm going to speak to you a little bit about functional behavior assessment, which has come to the forefront, happily, again, primarily through parents and the IDEA and all of what you've done to help support putting better practices into school systems and across the United States. So functional behavioral assessment, we'll talk about the reasons why we do them and some of the outcomes and how they inform practices for understanding behavior and building behavior supports. And if anybody wants to raise their hand and chime in, feel free. I don't mind taking questions, although I know there will be time at the end. Well, I think I'm a little short. I can't see the clock there, but I'll keep an eye on the time, so we do have time for that. Functional behavior assessment is really just the process of gathering information to try and do, as I said, the most effective things that we can to help manage challenging behaviors. And it can take many forms, many levels of precision. And it's never just once, it's really looking at the patterns of behavior across time, which we're going to talk about. So most of the talks today here, if you were here, focused on augmentative communication and communication systems. And one of the basic assumptions about behavior is that it is functional. So individuals will perform a behavior because it works for them. It gets them something that they want or out of something that they want. There's a number of functions for that behavior. And what our job is in doing a functional behavior assessment is to try and figure out what the relationships are between the environment and the behavior. So kids who have some special needs, such as Angelman's or autism, they have a risk of more challenging behaviors because often they have poor communication skills, sometimes difficulty waiting, they have learning difficulties, sensory impairments, and difficulties with social situations. And unfortunately, some of our kids are often met with a long history of failing, and that can make it even more difficult for them to try and figure out their behaviors. So in a combination, poor social skills, difficulty with communication, and sometimes some atypical behaviors or interests, such as some of the sensory behaviors that we see. All three of them kind of converge to create challenging behaviors. So how do we help? The functional behavior assessment is one of those tools we can use to help, and it's information gathering. What are the behaviors of concern? What are the conditions going on earlier in time? When a kid comes to school, we often ask, well, what's been going on at home? Those communication books between home and school are really important, so you can find out if something is happening the day before, or if something happened last night. Those kinds of questions can inform what's going on with the behavior. And then what happens just exactly before the behavior occurs? That can also help us predict if it's going to occur more or less. I always ask when I'm working with families or with teachers, well, when do you not see any behaviors? Because knowing about those situations also is really helpful in how are we going to recreate those situations and what's going on there that maintain good behavior. What happens right after the behaviors occur? This is all informational gathering, and the thought process starting by asking these questions: what else can we do to help them learn more appropriate behaviors that would give them the same outcome? And what can we learn from what has already been going on with the child? And unfortunately, sometimes that's the things that haven't worked so far. So we need to assess the situation. And again, as I said, as a behavior analyst, what we do is evidence-based, and there's been a lot of research on it. So across the years, we found that behavior has 4 major functions. And this is, again, back in the day, I've been really fortunate to have been in the field long enough to see applied behavior analysis grow and see some of these research articles come out that across the board will show us, using some of the assessments that we use, that behaviors fall into these categories. Unfortunately, I remember distinctly when it came out too, when we had a really easy checklist and everybody said, oh, this can be great. Now we know like what particular behavior goes with what. It's not always that simple. So there are multifunctional behaviors across situations and people, but this helps us to get a little bit closer, and the earlier you can intervene, so sometimes with the really young children, you can intervene much more effectively because they haven't learned to use their behavior for multiple kinds of things. And again, it is communicative, so I will say, which I don't want to forget, good behavior analysts will work with folks like you heard from earlier this morning. So the speech and language pathologists, or the occupational therapist, or the physical therapist. We have our technology and our ability and what we bring to the table, but they also have their expertise as well. And it's very much a collaboration. So a functional behavior assessment is done in that context of the individual child and all of the numbers of things going on, and as part of the picture for how you would do an overall intervention for any particular individual. So Escape or avoid something is often a major motivator. Getting attention is often a motivator. We call it tangible or obtaining things. And then more automatic or self-stimulatory or sensory motivation. And I always like to add, because it's embarrassing in our field in some ways, that we actually have research where we didn't think about the medical parts of things. And there's articles where they actually had to show that children had major ear infections when they were banging their head, which seems so intuitive to me, but again, we weren't looking at some of those things early on in the field, which is horrifying. So putting that in there is an important piece when I train or speak to teachers. Rule out medical issues. Make sure that there's nothing going on, particularly if the child comes in on a particular day and has a huge escalation in behavior. So how do we figure out what the function is that it might serve? We're looking for patterns in behavior. What is the maintaining that behavior? What's the student getting out of it? And it's not always what you think. So I really often tell the teachers that we should go through this process, even if you think it's for this or that function, because again, when you look across a lot of times, it's not always that. So the way that we look at behavior as behavior analysts is really the basic learning paradigm that we all learn behavior from our environment, and it applies to all behavior. Now, as a psychologist and a cognitive behavioral psychologist, I understand that there are thoughts and emotions that also mediate how we respond to our environment and what we may pay attention to in our environment. But basically, for our purposes, we call them the ABCs of behavior. The antecedent, what happens before the behavior. So what happens in the environment that tells me I should respond in a particular way? And then what happens after, the consequence, it's part of my learning. I will decide, well, that worked out pretty well for me. I think I'm going to do that behavior again. Or I don't really like the results of that, and I think I'm going to change my behavior. So it's in its very simplest form, but that's what radical behavior analysts think everything is learned that way, and there's really not a lot of, there's private things that we don't know about, so we're not going to even think about those. So most of my examples, unfortunately, are around little kids, but it does apply across everything. And my husband loves to say to me, don't try any of that M&M stuff on me. So all of our behaviors, I use it for myself in terms of what is really controlling how I'm behaving at any given moment sometimes. So I apologize for that, and hopefully as we have more questions, I can answer anything more specific to your particular kids. So to gain attention, one that we spoke about, and it's very common, Billy starts crying, his mom comes over and picks him up. So the antecedent is she's on the phone and he's alone in the living room. And he starts to cry, so mom comes over and picks him up. He wanted attention and he received it. Escaping. Maria starts to scream, bang her fork at the dinner table. Her dad tells her to go play in the other room. And then we take more of a look at it. She's at the table and her dad actually said, eat your peas. I can really relate to Maria here. Not my favorite. Maria screams and bangs her fork and dad says, okay, go and play in the other room. She doesn't have to eat her peas. Tangible, gain access. Paul pushes his little sister, takes the toy she's been playing with. So his sister has the toy train, pushes her down. He gets to play with the toy train. So his behavior has been very effective in getting him something that he wants. And again, these are just one instance, and I said early on, it's not just one observation. You're going to want to see a number of these and patterns developing. So Lucas is sitting by himself in the family room, rocking back and forth, flapping his hands. He's alone in the living room. Mom may have just had to go out, or his sister or dad, and he continues to rock back and forth, flap his hands. Doesn't really have any response to being alone. Likely that's an internal motivation and for a sensory need. So a behavior maintained by attention will likely occur more frequently if you're talking to someone else. If you have multiple kids, you divide your attention, you may see some of the behavior escalate. You're not attending, or kids like to see people get upset sometimes, or they laugh and enjoy. They make eye contact, so you know that they are doing it to get your attention. And unfortunately, sometimes our kids want constant attention. So there are behavioral ways, if we get to the intervention part, that you can help them to learn to need a little bit less of that attention by fading it over time. Here's just a little example here. So I think you can see a pattern developing there. The older I get, the more I just want to snuggle up that little one. And I think it's nostalgia for my three boys who are now 25, 27, and 30. I've become a softie in my old age, but obviously I think they want attention. Don't have anything wrong with them. I don't want you to get the impression behavior analysts don't snuggle or give attention or pay attention when needed, because certainly little children, if totally ignored and are really dysregulated, it's not going to help them. You're going to need to do something else. But this is from ABC, I guess, so hopefully added a little bit of levity there. And you can see it actually is potential that we didn't look at the antecedents for that particular situation, and it may be that the little one was told no more TV. So it's really a tangible function going on there with a little bit of attention mixed in. You can see how it becomes a little bit complicated. So a behavior maintained by escape will generally occur if you're asking the individual to do something that may be too hard for them or is putting some restriction on them, a less preferred activity, or things that they aren't given a choice in, right? Tangibly motivated, they want something. So if you've told them they can't have it or it's not time for that, you may see the behavior occur. And or like the little one we talked about earlier, if somebody else or your sister or somebody else has the object, you may see some behavior occur in order to get that. And as we talked about, sensory motivation is when they're left alone and they don't really seem to mind being alone because they're engaging in a sensory activity. And it may also be that they're overwhelmed or that they need to modulate their internal system. It's a tricky one because sometimes, as I said, they can use their sensory behaviors to try to escape some activity that they don't want to do either. So it takes a little bit of analysis to figure out what's going on. So what can we do? We can change antecedents. So what comes before? If we've decided that they are escape motivated, we can make sure that the expectations are very clear. and that there are maybe mini schedules, so they know this isn't going to go on all day. You're just going to have to do these 2 or 3 things. Keep direction short, clear, provide choices, warnings before transitions, sensory breaks at regular intervals, so they don't have to increase their behavior in order to access those, and models of appropriate behavior. So again, these are things that are proactive. Once you know or have some sense of why the behavior is occurring, you're going to want to change the environment to help the individual to either handle that environment better or to be able to escape it in a more appropriate manner, or to gain access to things that they want more appropriately. And this is a huge one, provide reinforcement, and this is generally where I start when I'm training in any public school system. Reinforcement is huge, but it has to be in the context of what the function of the behavior is. So you need to make sure that you're not giving kids huge amounts of tangibles as reinforcement if their behavior is for that function. You want to make sure that you're giving them tangibles at times when they are being appropriate. So you're catching them being good, right? You're remaining neutral about any inappropriate behaviors, starting small, building on successes. It's important to do preference assessments when you provide reinforcement, so you know, again, what is going to work to actually reinforce them and increase their behavior. So the definition of reinforcement is you have provided something after a behavior that increases the occurrence or makes it more likely to occur. So providing reinforcement on a very consistent, scheduled basis, which is also one of the first things I do going into a classroom, catch them being good. Are you reinforcing every 5 or 10 minutes on a regular basis? Because it's so easy to forget, and then you're going to get behavior for the wrong reason. So if it's attention, that's a really easy one a lot of times, because you just flip the attention to more of what you want to see. Same with if they're looking for tangible items, you again flip it to what you want to see and give them access to the tangible items at that time. And give them breaks before they have to use their behavior to actually tell you, I need a break, and then reinforce that. Wow, that was great. So there has to be some payoff sometimes along with getting out of something. And you start very small and build on your successes as you're doing all of that. But reinforcement is key across the board. Teaching adaptive alternatives. A lot of what we talked about earlier today, or the speech and language pathologists were using AAC devices, so certainly communication skills in general in concert with some of these other types of interventions are often going to be very helpful in helping individuals to maintain appropriate behavior. And functional communication training is a little bit different in some ways, because we definitely narrow down what that functional communication should be based on what our functional analysis told us. So if you know they want to escape, and they were talking about the home page, the first one of the pictures on there might be break, very easy for them to access. Or we sometimes do it separate on a low-tech kind of situation where 3 or 4 are there that use very functionally to help maintain their behavior. Come play with me, I need space, my turn, are some of the buttons or some of the, and we use potentially all done or just something that we can help prompt them to do when we know that that is the function of the behavior. And as I think they talked about before, which is key, some of the more motivating items for them should be front and center so they can easily request those instead of using inappropriate behavior. Waiting can also be an appropriate or important skill to teach as an alternative, and that sometimes leads to inappropriate behavior when they are made to wait and are frustrated. The same as social skills. Taking turns and learning how to share the toys will help them to know I can't just grab that tangible item from my peer or my sibling. And lastly, we change the consequences. And again, this should be specific to what the function of the behavior was. So overall, it's good to minimize language when kids are under stress and try to remain neutral. Ignore the behavior but not the individual. So we minimize language in case the function is attention. You don't want to be giving lots of attention after the behavior occurs. And you can still ignore the behavior if it's escape and continue to work through whatever it is you're asking them to do. Okay, well, when you're ready, let me know. We still have to clean up our plate. And you're not necessarily paying attention if they're screaming or crying, but you're not ignoring the individual either. Visual supports are huge, and generally, when we talk about all of what I just talked about, it goes into what we call a behavior support plan, and it should involve those 4 different areas where you can see that they have preventative opportunities involved in their behavior support plan, like choices and warnings, that there's something on the plan that says, what are we going to teach them for adaptive alternatives, that there's a reinforcement system on the plan, and that lastly, there's a consequence part of it. So some of these visuals would be specific to a variety of supports within a behavior support plan. And these are low tech, so we saw some really nice AAC pieces in high tech, but it doesn't have to be that way. And I'm also old enough to have been around when there were no AAC devices, and we used picture exchange, and we cut them out and we laminated them. And I was taught from the very start that you speak with the symbols as well, but it's come back to the forefront now where there's aided communication systems. And I think that's great, because I had been told in several times when the field went a little bit differently that you don't take their AAC device, you don't use it, it's theirs. And it confused me a little bit because I was trying to be communicative. So it's come back around to where that is really a good way to teach and to help and to model with your kids by using it as well. There's so many of them though, and I really feel for parents, because when I do go to try and do that, I can't always find what I want to say back to the child quickly enough, and they get frustrated. So hang in there, though. There were wonderful presentations earlier, and there's lots of ways to do that. And these are some of them, just really, really low tech, a few pictures. We often use just topic boards. A schedule can be helpful, right? Having a pouch where they know that they're all done. And again, those are important if kids have trouble sustaining attention with you. They can see visually, and it's again, a little bit different from a communicative piece of things in terms of them communicating. We are communicating visually to them. Sometimes the receptive ability is there and they can understand and structure themselves. They may not know that it says reading or snack, but they know that square means they're going to have to do something, and the next square means they're going to have to do something, and then they're going to be all done. And that can really help to motivate them to stay focused. And obviously they're aligned so that you do your reading and then you get your snack, which should be really fun. And if you were here earlier, the speech pathologist was speaking about the water play. So as behavior analysts, we would both use that to encourage and have that activity be motivating for communication, but we might also use it and arrange times where they could very easily see, stick with me for this and learn these 4 objects, and then you get water play. It could also help in motivation in that way. Okay, here's a more written schedule. Whiteboards are great, even if they don't have to have words on them, just drawing pictures, very helpful. Again, I meant low tech when I said low tech, right? The file folders are wonderful. Kids can manipulate them, teacher can manipulate them. First then board. Anybody use any of these devices out there? So you're all familiar with first then and with success? Sometimes, yep, great. Token boards, so this gets into, these pieces are kind of the preventative part of things. Token boards are the reinforcement piece. Don't have to have token boards. kids need to understand what the token means, and you can't just bring up a sticker chart and expect that's going to have any control over behavior. And that's what you find often in schools sometimes with a little bit of knowledge. Oh, of course they'll love this to earn 12 tokens. And that's really not going to work right away. They need to be taught what they mean. They probably need to be in a slower progression until they learn exactly what that means and what they're going to earn. And we often start with, here's one token, give it back to me, here's what you got, and move up from there. So, but showing them visually is helpful. With whatever they're earning, also very helpful. 5 of the tokens will get you the computer. This is very specific to an individual who actually learned how to use the timer and to give himself tokens when the timer went off. And you can see in the corner there what he's going to be earning. Gym sticker. You can make them very specific to particular activities and only use them at those particular times. Oops. Oh. Sorry. Okay. I had a bunch of slides that were also about self-regulation, which I guess have been cut off here inadvertently. But we do use visuals to help individuals also to know how much time is left in terms of pulling tokens off potentially. So you could do it that way. A little token of a clock or a watch comes off every 5 minutes. They know that their activity will be done by then. And it also can be helpful to help them internalize and know time passing and what that means for them. Even though they don't specifically know that was 5 minutes, they can get a sense of how long an activity is by breaking it up in that way. And sometimes we use colors, green and red, to help kids know what the choices are, what the good choices are, and what the not so great choices are, and how to make those decisions. So I guess I did breeze right through that. Questions?
We have 10 minutes left.
Excellent. Yes.
Hi, thank you very much. We just started doing ABA with our Angel, and we're having a little bit, we're getting to the bottom of it. We're having a little bit of friction between the SLP and the BCBA over which words to model on the talker. This SLP is focused on core words and simple words, and the BCBA is focused on motivating words. And there are some overlapping. Some core words are motivating for our Angel. There's definitely been a little bit of friction as to what to model. Have you had experience with that and kind of choosing between these, what motivating words, which the SLP would call fringe words, versus the core words?
Right. Yes, absolutely. And hopefully a lot of collaboration is needed. And as behavior analysts, my default is always to measure. So even at times when we're trying to decide which device may be best with this, these are with our speech and language pathologists, we may trial more than one and actually take data on the use and how frequent and how much, and if there's a difference between the devices. So in terms of the words, I kind of go to that place a little bit, and I would say, okay, let's use the words and see what we get using the ones that you're talking about. And is there a way outside of the device to probe some of the other words or teach the other words? They showed some of the printed out formats, and you could potentially teach those other words in a little bit different way and watch your data. So if the child's getting completely confused or is not really able to do that, then you kind of have to pare it back a little bit.
So your advice is just model all the words.
I would probably, try to see what specific words you're in disagreement about. Can you come to an agreement about particular ones and start there. So everybody's working on those, and then continue to discuss what are those other words and in what situations would they be needed, and why does the BCBA want those? Could they be around particular activities that they are going to serve as reinforcers? So the BCBA wants them to have access to them and know. Or again, unfortunately, it is a collaboration, and hopefully, I hate to say it, but good professionals will know how to do that and compromise and kind of come to an agreement. And I defer sometimes to the SLPs because that's their area. And then I take the data and go hopefully back with some data, some ability to say, it doesn't really seem like they're using these. Could we potentially use the ones that I'm thinking about, or add a couple of the ones I'm thinking about, and watch our data again to see if they're more motivating and if we get more use using
That's
that
helpful.
vocabulary.
Thank you.
Dr. Cannon, we have a couple of minutes for questions, and then would you be around
Yes,
later?
yes,
Okay.
and I will be around this evening too, so I would love to hear from any or all of you.
So our Angel is almost 2 years old, and we are even looking at this AAC talker, but sometimes it's hard for us using any the AAC talker. Is he losing attention? As a characteristic of Angelman, he's very young, and so the attentiveness to this talker is not there, or maybe am I presenting something not in a good manner? I mean, how do you identify at what point are you being successful working with your child versus is any, if you
Right.
could establish.
Well, again, I think in terms of a functional behavior assessment, if you're getting a lot of behavior, then I would look at the patterns of that and think, this is too difficult potentially. Is my child is that what you're asking? Like that we're getting behavior because this is too hard for them at this point. Can we break it down a little bit? Or can we do it in shorter increments? Or can we make sure there's something fun right after? Or can we use things that are very meaningful? I will confess I was surprised that I'm not sure I've had experience with really, really little kids using AAC necessarily. Mostly it's communication in terms of pointing and gesturing and interacting, getting a reciprocal back and forth at those ages, but you certainly could map on pictures and a device potentially to that. But if you're getting a ton of behavior, you may want to think about, is that working at this point? Or do we need to maybe take a few steps back and shape it up a little more slowly? So, and if there are speech pathologists who want to talk about that, I'd be happy to. It's definitely an individualized thing and something that is challenging.
Great, thank you.
So my Angel has a lot of anxiety, and a lot of his issues are probably either communication challenges or attachment or attention seeking, particularly to his father.
Right.
So, if we're in a room, he wants his dad's attention, he throws, hits. If dad has his brother on his lap, he'll go and push his brother off his lap.
Right.
And do you have any recommendations? Like, he'll throw toys, he'll pick up whatever he can to throw. Not necessarily at somebody sometimes, but
Right.
and
Right,
it's
sometimes. Right.
unless he gets that attention, there isn't much to stop
Right.
unless something is very rewarding
Right.
for him.
So it's hard to, hopefully part of this lets you know that you don't answer in a vacuum necessarily, that it takes some analysis to figure that out. And it does take some very consistent responses in an intervention package. So I have a number of ideas of things potentially. And it's not easy. And one of the visuals that somehow cut off here was around more of the anxiety and having an actual visual to say, I'm frustrated, and I can do this or something. But it does necessitate teaching individuals how to use that and reinforcing the use of it. And for the attention component, again, it can take some time. And it should be, it's effortful sometimes too, to make sure that you.
Next step to, okay, he identifies he's frustrated.
Mhm.
What's that next step?
The next step, if he identifies, part of that would be, well, how can I help you be less frustrated? I know it's frustrated, you're frustrated, you need dad's attention, you can have it in 5 minutes. So again, making sure, as I said, with the schedules of reinforcement, that he gets consistent attention so that he doesn't, and I'm sure he does. If he wants dad's in particular, you can put that schedule from dad on a very, very structured schedule that you then start to fade and open up a little bit to help him learn.
So I don't mean to keep pushing it, but I know this affects other kids.
Yeah, sure.
So I say.
And of course, nothing
okay,
I say is going to work across every
right.
kid.
So if I say you're frustrated, I see that, you want dad's attention, you can have it in 5 minutes. What do I do in the meantime?
Or you
for
could have a
those-
visual that says, say dad, instead of throwing something.
But
pull
what
off
do I
or-
do in those 5 minutes of time? Like if I say you can have his attention in 5 minutes, what do I do in his 5 minutes of time when he's throwing a tantrum and throwing things?
Well, again.
I've already addressed
Yep.
that he can have it.
Right, so it's not going to work necessarily immediately, and there would be the consequence part of the plan as well. So hopefully you won't get to, I know it sounds ridiculous, right? But if you have the other components of the plan really enriched in terms of prevention, so he has a way to have a card or the thing on his device that says dad's attention, right? So he's not going to have to do other things. And if he's getting reinforced so that dad is paying some attention, I know, really busy parents, how could we do this? But paying attention every 15, 20 minutes so that, again, he doesn't have to throw something. If you've, right. Yep, so again, and it's very effortful to start there and then shape it slowly, which is why families need some help too around being able to be supported and following through with all of those pieces of things. And it's not going to work all the time, but I would rely on my data. That's all I can do too. I can't tell you that's going to be the magic piece of it. I could just say, this is the plan based on what I've seen from some of what the function appears to be, and it's probably multifunctional. Here's what I'd like you to do, and then we'll see where the data leaves us. If it's not successful, we kind of try something else. And it's not. Right. Well, it's likely he's going to need to, right. Hopefully he'll catch him when he's asking appropriately or do a lot of the preventative, proactive kinds of things. Wow, I love the way you're sitting. Or he comes in and says, I'm going to sit with your brother for a second and then it'll be your turn. Wow, you're doing a great job waiting while I sit with your brother. Okay, cool, I'm coming. And initially he does that like immediately upon entering and then starts to fade it a little bit to where he can sit with the brother for 2 or 3 minutes and so on and so forth. And I know it's, I've been in the field for a long time. It's not easy, and I don't mean to say these are immediate results because it can take time, and other variables that I tried to talk about can be part of it. If kids aren't feeling well, or if they're very stressed from being in school, or things that they don't really understand at any given time, some of the interventions are not going to be as successful. So, have I gone over my time? Everybody's ready for lunch?
Okay. I'd like to thank you so much
Sure,
for your
absolutely.
presentation. And I think what's so difficult is that behavior is so complicated, and there are reasons why we have functional behavioral assessments that are needed for our kids. So I think those questions are really great and are deserving of an assessment. So thank you so very much.
Sure.
Thank you, everyone, so much for being here today. We really, really appreciate it, and I hope you go enjoy the rest of your day, and we're looking forward to seeing you tonight at the Gala. Bye.